Good evening. I'm Socrates Garrett, and we're broadcasting live from right here in Jackson, Mississippi, the heart of the Deep South, right here in the African-American-owned broadcasting studio. We believe digital.com, our own platform. And so it's critically important that in the African-American community, we control the narrative. I look forward to receiving opportunities to show and advertise your products for goods and services and to move your brand along in this community. We're broadcasting live on Facebook. On We Believe Digital Podcast, go to Roku and download our app, and We Believe Global, with shows like this to bring articulate, intelligent conversations and dialogue to our platform. So I'm here to continue sounding the alarm. This is how the South is going to rise again. Good evening, and welcome to Socrates Garrett Live. We're broadcasting live right here in Jackson, Mississippi, the heart of the deep, deep South. You know, Mississippi, I like to say the air is just a little bit cleaner and the grass is just a little bit greener. We're in a garden spot down here in Jackson, Mississippi, ideally located 200 miles away from New Orleans, Louisiana, Memphis, Tennessee, Shreveport, Louisiana, Mobile, Alabama, Birmingham, Alabama, are all within 200 miles. We should be the transportation hub. We should be the Mecca of the South based upon the geographical position that we've been blessed with. Here in Jackson, Mississippi, the commerce should be rolling. Interstate I-55, running north and south, intersects Interstate I-20 on your east and west corridor, right here in Jackson, Mississippi. In Jackson, Mississippi, we're blessed to have the Pearl River, a main artery that flows right down through the middle of our city. You know, many cities have to pump water in for their boardwalks and their recreation facilities, but not here in Jackson, Mississippi. The land is very, very fertile, and we're blessed with all of the great weather and environments that give you the opportunity to be active year-round. You know, climate change is having some impact on our city. We're getting a little warmer than we normally do. But for most part, we can have outdoor activities year-round right here in Mississippi. And since we have all of these God-given assets, and since we've been blessed the way that we have been blessed, then we have to ask ourselves, why is Mississippi last in every major important category? Last in education, last in health care, last in all of your economic indicators. There are no Fortune 500 companies in Mississippi or in Jackson, Mississippi. There's no opportunity to go to lunch and dinner with business people, CEOs of major corporations. There's no philanthropic arm that surfaces in Mississippi. And it's all because of our rugged past and our continued failure to recognize the strength of our diversity. It's all because of our selfishness. And you see, Mississippi wasn't always last. You know, there was a time when cotton was king and more millionaires were in Mississippi than anywhere else in the country. That's when the South was king. That's when you had the King Edward's Hotel in downtown Jackson and the Peabody Hotel up in Memphis, Tennessee, where all of the farmers came after the crops were in and they partied and celebrated the grand lifestyle that they were enjoying. But there was trouble in those waters because that wealth was built on the back of slaves, and African Americans were being treated in the worst ways imaginable. A human tragedy that was occurring in Mississippi was not occurring anywhere else in the world. You see, many people believe that the Europeans that moved down to the South were different from Europeans in Connecticut and Boston and places like that. We had a meaner, more aggressive, more barbaric-like experience in Mississippi, where slave trade ruled, and those in charge enjoyed the finest lifestyle that money and cotton could provide at the time. And then came the Civil War, and over 800,000 people died in the Civil War. You know, Lincoln didn't free the slaves because he was standing on moral high ground. It was because of the economic interests. So he had to try and maintain the country together. And one of the reasons for that was because he had to break the backs of slavery. And so after the Civil War, blacks were finally freed. And many blacks throughout the South didn't even know that they had been freed. And that's when we come to this next week coming up, this celebration of this wonderful new national holiday called Juneteenth. Because the blacks in Texas didn't get the message that they had been freed. And so now we're going to recognize Juneteenth, and it's going to be a national holiday. It's already a national holiday. And blacks ought to do something special on that day. Different from the 4th of July celebration, blacks ought to focus on where they are, the trials and the tribulations and the sacrifices that had to be made for them to get here, and what they must do to preserve quality of life for black folk in this country. And that ought to be all over America and all over the world, with all people of goodwill that believe that all men were created equal, and that they had certain inalienable rights to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. And so I hope we'll take this next week and go into that holiday working, not drinking and partying, but working and planning and strategizing and trying to determine what is it that we can do to implement policies and procedures that will make a meaningful difference in the lives of African Americans. It ought to be a day when the schools are open, and that blacks ought to attend that day with great economic summits. We ought to have crime summits and economic summits and education summits all over that weekend. And less beer drinking and wine drinking and blues making. We do that all year long. We ought not squander this opportunity to begin a national movement on how to act during the holiday. And this takes some training. You know, I recall as a boy on the farm that on the 4th of July, the cotton farmers would be chopping cotton in the month of July, trying to keep the grass from overtaking their crops. And so each 4th of July, my parents would insist that all of their children, would go to the cotton field to chop cotton, not in the back 40 where nobody could see you, but they wanted you to chop right along the side of interstate of Highway 16, where everybody was passing by and blowing their horn and frolicking and having a great time. And she made all of her children endure that abuse and chop cotton right next to that road. The woman was teaching her children a valuable lesson. That lesson was that work is the essence of how America was created and how you ought to celebrate. You ought to celebrate it by engaging in meaningful activities and work. And you ought to raise your flag and hold your head up high when others are making fun and mockery of your condition. That experience has served me well. It has served me so well until when trouble comes, I've always been able to turn to work as my source of relief. When trouble comes, I find that work gives me my greatest consolence. Work makes me think about better things and not focus on the tragedy of the moment. Even when your greatest loss of all times, and that's the loss of a mother, a father, a loved one, a child, I find that work is the only thing that you can do during that time. And so I want us to take this holiday that's coming up and focus on those kind of activities. It's all right to have fun. It's all right to celebrate, and we're going to do that anyway. But there was a tremendous sacrifice that was paid. We need to recognize it. And this is not a day for church. This is not a day that we ought to spend in church praying. Everybody can't be in church and praying because no work will get done. This is a day that we ought to clean our neighborhoods, that we ought to spend time with our families, and we ought to visit the cemeteries, and we ought to go to the museums, and we ought to talk to our children and ourselves about what it is we're trying to do. There's nothing wrong with visiting the cemetery and having real conversations with those that have come before you, because it is not your efforts, the work of your hands, that's created the space that you're in. Any success that you may be having today is coming from the sacrifice and the prayers of those that came before you. Grandmama was a praying woman, but she also was a working woman. And that work is manifesting itself in her great-grandchildren and for generations to come. You know, ambition and drive are two characteristics that everybody don't acquire. It's kind of like in your DNA, things skip around. You'll have one sibling with drive and determination, and you'll have one with that lacks ambition. You'll have one that walks fast, and you'll have one that walks slow. You'll have one of great faith, and you'll have another that doesn't believe at all. And so these characteristics are put upon you from your ancestors. I'm not here to say that every child ought to have ambition. I'm not sure that that is a good thing. I think a lot of times it can be a curse because you become just a workaholic and you just focus on that achievement goals. I must achieve, I must work, I must achieve. And so many other things pass you by. But it's okay. I wanted to take this time and talk a little bit about these issues in light of the holiday that's coming up next week. Let's get prepared to celebrate this national holiday in the best way possible. Let's raise the African American flag. Let's be proud. Let's recognize, have programs all over this country recognizing the tremendous sacrifice that was given to get us to this point, and make a commitment that I'll make this place better than I found it. Now, we're broadcasting live right here in Jackson, Mississippi at We Believe Digital Broadcasting Studio, an African-American owned studio. This is what I'm talking about. African-Americans' achievement. African-American own things, build things, create things. We're broadcasting live. We're being seen all over the world in over 139 countries. You can find us on Facebook, on YouTube, on WeBelieveDigital.com. You can find us on Roku TV. Our app sits right there with Showtime and Netflix. A little small company in Jackson, Mississippi, trying to break through like a lily in the desert. Every once in a while, in all of the brush, you will see a rose, you'll see a lily, you'll see a flower trying to break through in the middle of a garden of despair. And that's what we see here with WeBelieveDigital.com. That one day, that we too will have a footprint that is worthy of the sacrifices that was made by our ancestors. You can call us in tonight at 800-492-5186. This podcast studio and broadcast studio is available to you for your own podcast shows. We have a complete team and staff here that's able to produce your commercials, to handle all of your public relation needs, and to give you the ability to get your word out all over the country. And then to archive that information in an organized, systematic way that will allow you and for generations to come to be able to replay many episodes that were produced right here in this studio. That's real important. It's not a small thing. Many times our history is lost. Our history is stolen from us because there was no one that was keepers of the record. Keepers of the record is so very important. Think about all of the lost records in the early tribes of Africa. Think about all of the lost records of those who sacrificed here in stateside. And we're getting ready to go to a station break. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about some issues that are plaguing our community and plaguing this country. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
Socrates Garrett ENT.com is a diversified firm specializing in recycled aggregates and crushed concrete. Socrates Garrett ENT.com's recycled materials provide the construction industry with significant economic and environmental benefits by recycling clean concrete rubble into M.Dot grade rock materials. Recycled aggregates and crushed concrete can be applied to driveways, road construction, bank protection, parking lots, general bulk fills, and more. By using Socrates Garrett ENT.com's crushed concrete products, anyone from homeowners to general contractors can help reduce landfilled concrete waste, conserve natural resources, and gain significant economic savings on materials and disposal costs. For more information, please call 601-896-0084 or visit us online at SocratesGarrettENT.com.
Welcome back. This is Socrates Garrett Live. We're broadcasting right here from We Believe Digital Broadcasting Studio. We're being seen in over 139 countries on YouTube and Facebook, on Roku TV, and our very own platform, WeBelieveDigital.com. You can call us at 800-492-5186. We have programs that are running throughout this entire week, specifically from 12 o'clock in the noon hour all the way through late evening, of articulate and intelligent communications and conversations and programs designed to enlighten and lift up the spirit of African Americans and to portray us in a different role than that we see on the 6 o'clock news and the 10 o'clock news every night, where we're being marched across this TV screen in jumper suits, focusing on the crime that is taking place. We acknowledge that crime exists. We acknowledge that. And we're going to talk about crime and what we're going to have to do about it. And when I first started out, I told you about how beautiful land this was down here in Jackson, Mississippi. I don't know if I told you or not, but we have less than 3 million people here in Jackson, Mississippi. They have more people than that in Houston. And so it's a place where you can come to and you can buy land and you can build and you can grow. It's the next movement, as everyone that migrated to the north back in the 60s and 70s are now of an age where they are coming home. And we need them to come. But things have changed, and I must deal with the negativity of the things that are going on in our community and across this country. Crime. Crime is at an all-time high in the African-American communities, whether you're in Baltimore or whether you're in Birmingham or whether you're in Mobile or Jackson. Crime is out of control. And we have to focus on what we're going to do about crime because it is crippling and paralyzing our society. Now, Jackson, Mississippi has the dubious task of being number one in the murder capital of the world. I'm talking about right here in the heart of the Bible Belt. I'm talking about here in a state with few people. In Jackson, the city Jackson has 150,000 people, and how can we then have the distinction of being the murder capital of the world? What is going wrong? What has happened? It's the breakdown, the moral breakdown in our communities, fueled by oppression, suppression, fueled by bad public policy and poor leadership. And so we got to change all that. Now, I want to focus on solutions. And these solutions may apply to Jackson, Mississippi, or they may apply all over the country. First of all, our police force is unmanned, undermanned. Our police force cannot match up with the criminal element in our communities. We've created a scenario where we've tied the police officers' hands. They are unable to do the kinds of things to curtail crime in our communities. And part of that is based upon the fact that in the African-American community, we have a trust factor, a distrust factor. Now I understand the distrust associated with African Americans that are 65 years and older because they have experienced some things personally that trauma is hard to get over. I get that. But that group is not committing these crimes. So they shouldn't have an issue of trust. It is a breakdown, a lack of civility in our community that's taking our young men's lives at a rapid pace. Now, what are we going to do? We're going to have to beef up our police departments. Jackson, Mississippi should have 300 plus police officers. It's got approximately 200. We're missing a third of the required officers to keep this city safe. And instead of the wisdom of the people that we elected to office in our legislatures that are writing laws and policies to support municipalities throughout the entire state, Jackson gets no support from the state of Mississippi, even though it is the capital of the state of Mississippi. Even though the police department has to police and maintain safety on all of the state buildings that are in our capital city. And the state pays no taxes. The state doesn't contribute any money at all to assist our city in being able to hire the number of police officers that's required to keep our city safe. It's just the opposite. Our state has invested in its own police department that is designed to patrol around where state capital is located. How short-sighted can you be? You cannot patrol in a small section of our city and expect the rest of the city to not commit the crimes that are continuing going on now. So instead of hiring its own 120 officers to patrol 1/8 of the city, those dollars ought to be put in the municipal budget to hire 100 police officers to bring Jackson up to the required level of 300 officers. Now, state's not going to do it. I get that. And the reason the state of Mississippi will not support the municipality, the city of Jackson, is because it is controlled and run and managed by African Americans. And Europeans have a hard time serving under African American leadership. And so when we got our first elected black mayor back in 1997, Mayor Harvey Johnson Jr., the white flight was off and running. The tragedy of a white flight is that it bred black flight. And some of our more talented people in the African American community left Jackson as well. So we're not going to get any help from the state. So what are we going to do? Well, we got to first recognize how a municipality works. I don't care where you're living. Where does the city get its money from in order to provide this valuable, most important service? Well, let's look at that. The city gets its money from 5 specific areas. It gets its money from property tax. Okay, that's a big one. Property tax. And so when you have a city that has more renters in the city than homeowners, you have the lack of property taxes. And when you in a poor city, if 42% of your population lives below poverty, they're not paying property taxes. And so poor cities throughout all states struggle to get enough revenue from property taxes to be able to handle city business. What's the second source of revenue? Sales taxes. Well, if the merchants all moved out of the city and opened up stores and restaurants and establishments outside of the city during the white flight, then the remaining citizens of Jackson have to leave Jackson to shop in the surrounding communities. Now, what does that do? What does that do? And I think we got to spend some time talking about this until our citizens understand what's happening. It eliminates the sales taxes that the city so desperately need to provide police protection. It's not that when you shop in surrounding cities, it's not that you just want to buy something nice over there that's going on. It is that you're underfunding your police department and you got high crime. And you or contributing to the high crime because you're not allowing the city to have the revenue necessary to hire the police department that it needs. We got to connect these dots. Next, where does the city get its money from? Fees. Well, what are fees? Well, cities can provide specific services that it can charge for. One, the perfect example in Jackson, Mississippi, who is the owner of the reservoir that sits here in Jackson, Mississippi. The city produces drinking water, and it charges its citizens a fee for water. The city of Jackson provides water up to the Nissan plant. It charges a fee for water. Transmission lines had to be built to get the water there. The city of Jackson provides water for Byram, Mississippi. It charges a fee for its water. Well, what else does it do? It has wastewater. The city of Jackson ran the regional wastewater treatment plant, which meant that it treated waste from Brandon and Pearl and Flowood and surrounding cities. And it charged a fee for that. $5-6 million just to our community on the east side of the river in Rankin County. Fees. Now, when you lose your operations that you were getting fees for, otherwise, when Rankin County builds its own wastewater treatment plant, it is not that they just start treating their own waste. It is now Jackson has suffered a tremendous hit because it lost the fee. When it lost the fee, it cannot provide police protection. Fees, tickets on the interstate in the city, those are fees. Some of you say and understand that when a city is running short on revenue, they will issue more tickets because they are trying to generate revenue to provide the basic service. Fines, municipal judges, parking violations. All of these are fines, traffic tickets. The city gets this revenue from fines. And then lastly, it gets revenue from grants. That's where you have a full, or you ought to have, a fully funded grant writing department that just writes for grants every day, all day. The city of Jackson had a grants writing department under Mayor Harvey Johnson. I'm not exactly sure whether we have one now or not. So let's just summarize and recap. The city gets its revenue from property tax, under tremendous pressure, sales tax, under tremendous pressure, fees, under tremendous pressure, fines we got to pick going up, and grants under tremendous pressure. So the city is losing its ability to provide its basic services. Now, we got to be able to fix that. We got to be able to fix that, or we will continue to see a decline in the services that the city is providing. And what should a city be providing? Number one, police protection. Number one, again, police protection. Fire protection. The city should be providing clean water and wastewater, It should be providing infrastructure, streets and bridges. And it should be providing jails. Those are the things that we have to balance. And each one has an impact on the other. Now, we're broadcasting live right here from Jackson, Mississippi at We Believe Digital Broadcasting Studios. We're being seen in over 139 countries. We're being seen on Roku TV. Our app sits right there next to Showtime and Netflix. We're being seen on Facebook. We're being seen on WeBelieveDigital.com, our own platform. We're also on YouTube. We're being seen all over this country. We're going to break for a commercial, and we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Q Talicia Garrett. I am here to introduce our New South Development and Training Outreach Hour every Tuesday at 2 p.m., giving you information on how to become a part of the programs through USDA and Farm Service Agency. We can be reached at 678-779-9468. We can also be found online at newsouthoutreach.com.
Advertise on WeBelieve.global, a brand new digital media platform. Share your brand with our audience on our many global live stream TV broadcasts and over the radio. For more info, visit WeBelieve.global or call 800-492-5186, option 1.
We're broadcasting live, and welcome back. This is Socrates Garrett Live, coming to you from We Believe Digital Broadcasting Studio, right here in Jackson, Mississippi. And we're talking about the basic ideas and concepts of things that the city has to provide in order to have a vibrant economy and a vibrant citizenry that gives a great quality of life. And we've been talking about those things, and just to recap very briefly, the city's got to provide police, fire, it's got to have infrastructure, it's got to provide water and drinking water, and it's got to provide wastewater services and jails for the housing of those who break the law. The city has to provide that. The city has to get its money. It gets this money from property taxes, sales taxes, fees and fines and grants. It has to have a vibrant community to be able to do that. Now, the other thing that the city is responsible for, because it has a $300+ million budget, is this thing called the economy. The city has to have and protect and manage its economy. It has to make its dollars turn over within itself. Now, we fuss at our consumers when they run outside of the city limits and they buy goods and services from other places. And we know that hurts us because we lose the sales taxes associated with those purchases. But how many times do we talk about that the city doesn't make its own dollars turn over in its own boundaries, in its own city limits? When will we start to hold our city leaders accountable and say, just like a citizen ought not go outside of Jackson and shop for things that they can find in Jackson, when are we going to say to them that the city should not procure goods and services from outside of Jackson when it can find them inside of Jackson? And so if you have a city that's 85% African American, then 85% of your economy ought to turn over in that city. That's what's got to happen. If you're going to fix this problem, you first got to understand the problem. And then you got to implement strategic things, policies and ordinances that are designed to keep Jackson's dollars in its economy so that we'll be able to collect more sales taxes, so that we'll get more property taxes. We'll get less fees and fines, but we'll get greater participation if the city just understood that. Now, the city is like the church. The city itself can't make any decision. It's the elected officials that we put down there to manage this $300 million budget. They have to understand that a vibrant black business class is critical. There is nothing more important than that in a black city. Nothing more important than that. And so when you're ill prepared and when you don't have a fundamental understanding of how to manage the city, it's evident in your decisions. Now, for example, the city sent out a request for a proposal for a company to provide garbage collection. I know we've talked about this a lot, but I got to connect these dots. Now, a firm who just happens to be African American was the recommended provider to an African American city council, saving the city $1.2 million a year. Now, let's think about that for a minute. Just let that soak in. Now, $1.2 million a year savings. Now, if that savings had come from Asians, Japanese, Caucasians, I don't care where it came from, the city of Jackson must take advantage of it and avail itself of the savings. Why? Because we have an underfunded police department and we have the highest crime in the nation. We're the murder capital of the world. Why? Because we have an underfunded, undermanned, understaffed police department. Connect these dots. You cannot, and our city council has voted to reject the low bidder for garbage collections, thereby not taking advantage of the savings, and say they want to their current provider, which is a European-owned waste management, a national firm that has been picking up the garbage in Jackson for over 35 years. 35 years of picking up garbage in Jackson is $500 million in revenue, some $400 and some million in revenues that they've taken out of this donut hole. And now when you have the opportunity to choose an African American firm that's $1.2 million low and you turn it down, it tells me you're ill prepared and you don't understand the economics and the economy of what is required to move our community forward. But we're going to help you. Too often in our community, we elect people into positions that are ill prepared to manage budgets of this magnitude. Now, why is that? Because we are still fighting yesterday's wars. You see, we are still electing people to serve in management and leadership roles that were civil rights advocates. We don't need advocacy in the city government. We need leadership. We need advocacy to remain in the advocacy role. But in the government, we need people who understand that I cannot forego a $1.2 million a year savings on trash collection because my police department is underfunded. You gotta connect that dot. You gotta say that if we have the dollars turning over in our communities with a strong, black, vibrant business class, that sales taxes, property taxes would increase. And what does that do? It allows you to fix your streets, your roads, your bridges. It allows you to fight crime. It allows you to move from the number 1 murder capital down to number 40. And it does not require you to be dependent upon Europeans. The legislature won't do anything for you. We get that. Black leaders, we get that. It's a shame, it's a disgrace that this is the capital city and that our legislature does not put any money in this capital city for fire protection, police protection, infrastructure and maintenance. Doesn't do any of that. What they do is they put some money in a police charades that's designed to keep them safe when they're here in session. Not giving a damn about the rest of Jackson's. So we get that. But as Capman said to me on the radio last night, we can't blame others for our problem when we have the ability to turn things around. Now, how do we turn things around? Take this $1.2 million savings. Run with that. Run with that. It is critically important. If you pass that up, you set your city back to the position, to the future of what happened in Detroit. When you bankrupt this city, city leaders, elected officials, when the state takes it over, the first thing that they do is set aside, eliminate all elected officials. That's the first thing they do. When they come in and they take it over, just like when they take over school districts, the first thing they do is they remove the superintendent and the school board. They set it aside. Gone. When they take over a city, they set aside the local government and install their own government. So it's more than one way to fix this problem. But you got to understand what you're fighting against. Black leaders throughout this country, throughout this world. Understand what you're fighting against. What you see is not what's happening. What you think is happening is not what's going on. There's strategic planning and long-range planning that has occurred in Jackson, Mississippi that will impact this city over the next 20 years. The 20-year plan is in progress. The 20-year plan doesn't call for African American leadership. Well, they can't just take our city. No, we have to give it to them. Well, how are we going to give it to them? You give it to them when you're unable to fund your police department, when you're unable to provide clean drinking water, when you're unable to remove the lead in these pipes in these old houses, when you're unable to treat your waste, they take over. And they didn't take over, you gave it to them. And how did you give it to them? I got to go over it again. How did you give it to them? Because you refused to accept the $1.2 million savings on garbage collections in the city. Because of some desire to please people that don't look like you. Some misguided place that you want to get along, and you don't understand the 20-year plan that doesn't have you in it. You think you have the ability to dislike your brother for some petty unknown reason, and to go as far as to try and even blackball black business people in the city because of some personal grievance that you have. Not knowing that is exactly what is required of you for us to lose control of our city and lose the ability to protect ourselves and to lose all of the gains that our ancestors died for. This is so serious. And so we're going to have to deal with it by the numbers. You would hope that we have gained education and that we would be in a position now where we understand all of this. And no one has to go in and give us the fundamentals of how you grow your city and how you improve the quality of life for your citizens. Every politician you know now has picked up on the term improve quality of life. But they don't know how. They don't know how. The number one important factor from growing a city and saving a city is to control its economy and make sure its dollars turn over inside of its boundaries, number one. You do that with ordinance that says all local businesses, black or white, will have a 10-15% preference on contracts that are let by this city. And don't tell me, oh, you can't do that. That's state law precludes you from doing that. That's the one thing that you ought to be petitioning your legislatures about is home rule. Declare a state of emergency in the city. Why not? You're the number one murder capital of the world. Everybody understands you ought to declare a state of emergency. You got a drinking water crisis that lasted for several months, just last year. Folks couldn't flush their toilets. You got an economy, you got 42% of your population living below poverty levels. You under a state of emergency. That is it. And under the state of emergency, now get this, elected officials, because I know you don't know. But under the state of emergency, you are allowed to suspend the rules. Now, we're so jealous and so ill prepared for the positions that we're in that when even our mayor of our great city declared a state of emergency so that he could suspend the rules, so that he could impact this economy, so that he could find revenue to fix this police department, so that he could do these things I've been talking about, our own city council voted against the declaration, denying him the opportunity to implement this important tool. And it's not solely because of this crab in the barrel syndrome. It is partly due to ignorance, being ill prepared to run a city of this magnitude. Now, we're going to have these talks, and we're going to talk about these solutions, what I said that we need to do. And what we need to do, very clear: consolidate your police departments. Hinds County Sheriff Department, Jackson Police Department, all your security guards at your public universities, all of your energy workers, all your gas and meter readers, all of those people ought to be able to communicate directly with our police department. We see anything that moves in this town, we lock it down. That's what we ought to do. But you got to be able to work together to do that, in a local agreement to do that. That's what you ought to do to fight crime. 2, fund the police department. Take the $1.2 million savings and in savings from wherever you can get them. Increase your police force by a third. Have Jackson with over 350 police officers on the street every day. We can do this. All it's going to take is visionary leadership. My time is up, and we'll be back next week. This has been Socrates Garrett Live. Join us next week, same time, same station. Good night.
Advertise on WeBelieve.global, a brand new digital media platform. Share your brand with our audience on our many global live stream TV broadcasts and over the radio. For more info, visit WeBelieve.global or call 800-492-5186, option 1.